She was evicted from her apartment in late October. By the second week of January, when the temperature outside dropped to 18 degrees, the inside of her shelter had not gone below 60. No heater, no propane, no electricity, just bricks. Old ones, free ones, the kind that had been sitting in a pile behind a demolished factory for 3 years, getting rained on, snowed on, ignored by everyone who walked past. Vonda Ibekwe, 53 years old, former kiln operator, former tenant, currently living on a lot in East Lexington with no lease and no plan except this one. She knew something about those bricks that almost nobody who walked past them knew. She knew what they'd been through, and she knew what they could still do. Here's what I kept asking myself when I first started watching her work. The question sounds simple, and that's exactly why it nagged at me. Bricks are cold. You touch a brick wall in January, your hand comes away numb. So how does a woman with no money, no fuel, and no insulation material build a shelter out of the coldest feeling material on the property and somehow end up warmer than half the people sleeping in tents 3 blocks away? That question has an answer. It took me a while to understand it. I'm going to walk through it with you the same way I worked through it myself, starting with the wrong explanation, because the wrong explanation is the one that almost makes sense, and understanding where it breaks is where the real answer hides. Theo thought he already knew the answer. Theo is 64, former plumber, been unhoused for going on 3 winters now. He camps about 100 yards from where Vonda set up, on the other side of a collapsed section of chain-link fence. Sharp man, not wrong about much. When he saw Vonda start dragging bricks in November, organizing them, stacking them, hauling load after load across the crumbling asphalt, he watched for about 2 days before he said anything. Then he walked over. "Those are going to make you miserable," he told her. Not mean about it. Just matter of fact, brick pulls heat out of the air. That's what it does. You're building yourself a cold box. Vonda didn't argue with him. She just kept stacking. "I've been in brick buildings in winter," Theo said. "Old ones with no heat. I know what it feels like." She looked up at him. "How long did you stay in those buildings?" He thought about it. "A few nights, maybe a week." She said another brick. "Come back in February." Theo wasn't wrong about the experience. He was wrong about what the experience was measuring. This is the thing that tripped me up too at first. When you walk into a cold brick building, the brick does feel like it's pulling heat off you. And in a technical sense it is, in the early stages, before the mass has absorbed any warmth, the thermal gradient runs from your warm body toward the cooler surface. The brick takes heat from the air around you. That part of Theo's account is accurate. But here's the thing he couldn't know from a week's stay. That process runs both ways. Brick doesn't just absorb heat, it stores it, and then, very slowly, over hours and hours, it gives it back. The material has what physicists call high thermal mass. It takes a long time to heat up, and it takes a long time to cool down. In a cold building that nobody has warmed, the brick feels cold because it absorbed cold during every previous hour. Feed it warmth, and it will store that warmth. Then it will release it steadily, long after the original heat source is gone. Vonda had spent 15 years operating kilns in a ceramics plant. She understood fired clay the way a baker understands flour, not abstractly, but in her hands, in the relationship between heat and time and material. She'd watched clay go through temperature cycles. She'd seen what high-fire clay does and doesn't do. The chimney bricks scattered across that lot weren't just rubble to her. They were familiar. She knew exactly what she was working with. The bricks came from 2 demolished industrial chimneys that had stood at the edge of the property until about 4 years ago. They're what's called high-duty fire brick, the specific type used for chimney lining, rated for sustained exposure to temperatures above 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They're denser than standard construction brick. Heavier. Denser means more mass per cubic inch, and more mass means more heat storage capacity. When crews demolish a chimney like that, the bricks come down mixed with mortar residue, some cracked ones, some in perfect shape. The good ones, and most of these were good, are about 9 inches long, 4 1/4 wide, 3 inches thick. Each one weighs roughly 8 pounds, not light. Vonda sorted them. She did it over about 3 days in early November, working a few hours at a time, checking for cracks along the face and through the core. She rejected maybe 1 in 5. The rest she stacked in loose piles by size, using a piece of chalk she'd found to mark them. X for reject, nothing for keep. That sorting process confused Theo too. He came back on day 2 and watched her for a while. "Why do the cracks matter?" he asked. "A cracked brick can't store the same way," she said. "The crack breaks the continuity. Heat moves through the mass. You want the mass intact." He chewed on that. "So you're actually trying to hold heat in these things. That's the whole point. In bricks." In bricks, he walked back to his side of the fence. "She had to solve the ground problem first, and I want to be specific about this because it's the part most people miss entirely when they think about cold weather shelters. Ground contact kills you, not dramatically, slowly, conductively. The earth in winter has enormous thermal mass of its own, and it runs cold. Whatever touches it, your sleeping bag, your floor, your shoes, starts giving up heat to it immediately. You can have the most insulated walls in the world and still freeze on a cold floor." Vonda knew this. She'd heard it from experience rather than textbooks. You learn what ground contact does to a body when you've spent enough nights close to the ground. Her solution was simple, and it cost her nothing: pallets. There were 4 of them stacked near the fence line, the kind that shipping companies abandon after deliveries. Standard 48 by 40-inch oak pallets. She dragged 2 of them together, side by side, building a platform about 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. The deck boards sit roughly 6 inches off the ground, and that 6-inch air gap does one specific thing. It breaks the thermal connection between whatever is on top of the pallet and the cold earth below. The air in the gap is still and doesn't conduct. The wood conducts poorly compared to soil. The break is imperfect. It's always imperfect, but it's real, and it matters. On top of the pallets, she laid cardboard, 2 layers. The cardboard's job is to fill the gaps in the pallet deck and add another thin layer of still air between her sleeping surface and the wood. Then a piece of salvaged outdoor carpet, the kind with rubber backing which she found rolled against a utility shed at the edge of the property. The carpet adds a small amount of insulation and a larger amount of psychological comfort, which is not nothing. That was her floor. Then she started building the walls. The shelter she had in mind was small. She'd thought this through carefully, and it was not the instinct most people would have. The instinct is bigger: more space, more room to move, more air to breathe. But thermal mass logic runs against that. A smaller volume holds heat from a given source better than a larger one. If your heat source is your own body, a small volume heats up faster and loses heat more slowly. She designed it as roughly a 7 by 7 interior footprint, about the size of a large bathroom, high enough inside to sit up straight but not high enough to stand, around 4.5 feet at the peak. The shape is a modified lean-to, not a box, one wall taller than the other, roof slanting, the tall wall facing south. She built the walls dry-stacked, no mortar, no adhesive, just brick laid on brick, staggered like real coursework, each row overlapping the joints of the row below it. This is structurally stable for low walls. Masons' apprentices learn this before they touch a trowel. The bricks interlock through weight and friction. Done properly, a dry stacked wall 2 feet high and 1 brick deep can hold its shape for years without any binding material. She went 2 bricks deep on the primary walls. Not 1 brick, 2. A double wythe wall. The 2 layers of brick, separated by a 1-inch air gap created by small broken brick chips she used as spacers. She knew from her ceramics work that air gaps matter. In kiln construction, air gaps slow the movement of heat out of the system. Here, she wanted to slow the movement of heat out of the shelter. The double wall, she told me later, was the part she was most confident about. /2 courses deep, gap between them. The outer course slows the cold coming in. The inner course stores the warm. They're not talking to each other fast enough for the cold to win. I thought that was a pretty good way to say it. Theo came back 4 days after the walls went up. He stood outside and looked at what she'd built. She was inside, threading salvaged wire through gaps in a piece of sheet metal she was using as a roof panel. "You're going to need something for the top," he said, working on it. "Those bricks don't do anything for the roof." She looked up. "Right, roof is different. Roof is just weather. Walls are the battery." He came around to the entry side. "The battery. Say you charge a battery during the day, she said. You use the power at night. The brick does that with heat. Sun hits the wall during the day, the brick absorbs it. At night, the brick gives it back, inside. That sounds like it works in a solar panel. It works in a brick wall facing south, has worked in brick walls facing south since before anybody was writing down how it worked. He leaned against the fence and crossed his arms, thinking, what happens when there's no sun? My body puts out about the same as a small light bulb, she said. Doesn't sound like much, but inside this volume, after a few hours it adds up. The bricks absorb it, hold it, let it back out slow. You're betting on your own body heat. I'm betting on the bricks, she said. My body is just the source. The south wall is where most of the real work happens, and this is where the Socratic moment of the whole build lives. The question that, once you see it, can't be unseen. She built the south wall 3 courses taller than the others, and at the base of that tall south wall she left a gap. Not a mistake. A deliberate opening about 8 inches high and running the full width of the wall, roughly 7 feet. She covered it with a strip of clear, heavy-gauge plastic she'd pulled from a roll someone had discarded near the industrial shed. The plastic seals the gap against wind but passes light. That gap faces south. Low winter sun comes in at an angle that hits the inner face of the south wall, directly from about 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, 4 hours of direct solar exposure on the inner brick face. During those 4 hours, the inner surface of the double-wide south wall absorbs solar radiation. It doesn't just warm the air, it charges the mass. The bricks in the south wall climb in temperature. They might gain 15-20 degrees of surface temperature over those 4 hours. And then, after the sun moves and the plastic is covered over with cardboard at night, those bricks don't immediately dump that heat back to the outside. They lose it slowly. Through both faces, the outer face loses it to the cold air outside. The inner face loses it, steadily, over 8, 10, 12 hours, to the air inside the shelter. That inside surface, giving off warmth at 2 in the morning when Vonda is sleeping, is the whole game. I want to stay with the analogy I mentioned earlier, because it breaks in an interesting way. The easy way to think about this is a sponge. Sponge soaks up water during the day, squeezes it out at night. Bricks soak up heat during the day, release it at night. That's a useful starting image. It gets you roughly to the right territory. But here's where it fails. A sponge releases water fast. Squeeze it, and most of the water comes out in a few seconds. The thermal release from brick doesn't work like that. It's not a squeeze. It's more like the slow seep from a saturated piece of soil. Steady, continuous, hard to stop once it's started, running for hours because the material doesn't have a full state in the way a sponge does. The brick doesn't dump its stored heat in one push. It releases a fraction of a degree per hour through conduction, the rate determined by the conductivity of the material and the thickness of the wall. That slow release is the point. That's what makes it useful for a person sleeping inside a shelter. You don't want a blast of heat at midnight and nothing by 4 in the morning. You want a floor that's warm at 4 in the morning and a wall that's still giving off what it stored 15 hours ago. Fired ceramic does that. It really does. That's not folk wisdom or wishful thinking. It's the reason that high thermal mass construction has appeared independently in Anasazi cliff dwellings, in the rammed earth homes of northern China, in the vernacular architecture of southern Spain, in every culture that had cold nights and daytime sun and no fuel to burn. People figured this out by feel, long before anyone put a number on it. Vonda figured it out in a ceramics plant, watching clay behave through temperature cycles for 15 years. The roof was the concession to practical reality. Brick doesn't work overhead. Not without serious engineering. A flat brick roof on a small structure would require lintels, would require weight distribution calculations, would require skills that are harder to acquire on a vacant lot in Lexington in November. Vonda knew this. The roof was never going to be thermal mass. So the roof is hybrid. The skeleton is 3 salvaged metal studs. The light-gauge steel framing used in commercial construction, which she found in a pile of demolition waste at the back edge of the property. She bent them at a shallow angle to create the slope, wiring them together at the ridge with salvaged electrical wire stripped of its sheathing. Over the skeleton, 2 overlapping sheets of corrugated metal roofing. the kind used on pole barns which she found in the same pile. The metal stops rain and snow. Over the metal, on top, a layer of cardboard, then a piece of polyethylene sheeting she'd traded for at the day shelter. A woman named Rosalind who worked intake there and had access to donated materials nobody had claimed. The poly goes on last, lapped over the walls at the edges, held down on the windward side with 3 bricks set on the roof edge. The roof is not the strength of the system. The roof just keeps precipitation off. The walls are where the physics live. She also added something at the entry, a short dogleg approach, 2 small brick walls set in an L shape so that you have to make a turn to get from outside to inside. That turn breaks the wind. No matter which direction the wind comes from, it can't drive straight into the interior. The dogleg entry is one of the oldest tricks in vernacular cold weather architecture. Inuit architects used it. Mongolian yurt camps orient their entries away from prevailing wind for the same reason. Vonda came to it by logic. Every cold thing that comes inside is heat that has to come from the bricks, and the bricks can only give back what they've got. Theo showed up again in the second week of December. He stood outside and called in. Vonda told him to come through. He came through the dogleg, ducked under the low entry, stepped onto the pallet floor, stood there for a moment. Outside it was 31 degrees. Light wind from the northwest. "Huh," he said. "What? It's warmer in here than I thought. What did you think it would be?" He looked at the south wall. It was 6 in the evening, no sun for hours. The wall sat there, dark and quiet. "I thought it would be about the same as outside," he said. "Maybe a couple degrees better." "It's 47 in here right now," she said. "It'll be 52 or 53 by the time I wake up. The bricks haven't finished giving back what they took today." He put his hand flat against the inner face of the south wall. "That's warm," he said. "That's what I charged during the day." He took his hand off the wall and looked at it like he was checking to see if the warmth had transferred to his palm. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, just something he thought he understood had rearranged itself into a different shape. "I still don't believe the 60 degrees part," he said. "Come back in January," she told him. She sealed the wall gaps with a material that cost her nothing and that most people would have walked past without thinking twice. Mud. Not just any dirt. She found a low spot at the back of the property where water pooled after rain, where the soil had a clay content high enough to pack and hold without binding agent. Clay-rich soil, when wetted and packed into a crack, dries hard. Not as hard as fired clay, not waterproof the way ceramic is, but hard enough to cut drafts, and drafts are a specific enemy of thermal mass efficiency. A drafty shelter doesn't hold heat because the moving air carries it away before the mass can reabsorb it. Dead air is the goal. Still air, trapped between surfaces that are holding warmth. She mixed the clay soil with a small amount of straw she'd pulled from a torn bag behind a feed supply depot. Old straw, dry, loose. Mixed into the clay, the straw fibers give the mud pack a small amount of tensile strength so it doesn't crumble when it dries. This is a technique called cob. It's not a new technique. It's one of the oldest building materials in human history. She didn't know the word for it. She just knew the logic: pack the gap, let it dry, test it with your hand for draft. She packed every joint she could reach on the interior. Then she packed the outer joints at the bottom courses, where cold was most likely to push in. Gaps between the double walls at the top she left open. That gap needs to breathe or moisture accumulates. The mud dried in 4 days. After that, holding a lit match near any seam produced a flame that didn't move. No draft. There's a question I kept coming back to during those weeks of watching, and I think it's the most honest question about the whole enterprise. What happens on a cloudy week? January in Lexington can run 5, 7, 9 days with no direct sun. Overcast, flat gray light, nothing to charge the south wall. The passive solar strategy only works when there's solar. So what happens when Vonda goes through a stretch where the sun doesn't show? Her answer was layered, and it was honest about where the limits are. Cloudy week, the bricks don't get as high, she said. They might get to 45 degrees inside instead of 60. That's the real floor. 45. I haven't been below that. She paused. I'm also inside for a lot of the day in winter. My body's in there. My body adds to what the bricks are holding. Every hour I'm inside, I'm putting something into the mass. That's not a small contribution. A resting human body puts out roughly 80 to 100 watts of heat, comparable to a bright incandescent light bulb. In the volume of Vonda's shelter, over 8 hours of sleep, the heat added by her body accumulates in the brick mass. Not much, but on a cloudy day when solar isn't contributing, it matters. She also does something that she described without quite calling it by its technical name, which is thermal preloading. On afternoons when sun is forecast for the next day, she heats a cast iron skillet over a small fire outside the shelter. Fast food trash, scrap wood, whatever she can find, then brings it inside and sets it against the inner face of the south wall. Not a raging heat source, just a supplemental charge to the brick mass on nights when the daytime sun wasn't enough. The skillet cools over a couple of hours. The wall absorbs what it absorbed. Overnight, the wall gives it back. That's the system. Sun when there is sun, body when there isn't, supplemental cast iron when the margin gets thin. Rosalind stopped by in mid-January. She's the intake worker at the day shelter on Georgetown Road. 44 practical, doesn't waste words. She'd been checking on Vonda roughly twice a month since Vonda stopped coming in at nights. She stood inside the shelter for a few minutes, looking around. Vonda had added a few things since the initial build. A shelf made from a crate, a blanket hung over the entry from inside to add a second barrier to the dogleg, a small lidded pot that she used for water storage. Rosalind took out her phone and checked the weather app. It was 19 last night, she said. Vonda nodded. In here? 61 when I woke up, Vonda said. I have a thermometer. She held up a cheap strip thermometer, the kind used in aquariums, sold for $1 at pet shops. She'd stuck it to the inner face of the south wall at chest height, where she could read it without moving from her sleeping position. Rosalind looked at the strip. It read 63. She looked at the bricks, then back at Vonda. How is this legal, she said, and it wasn't really a question. I'm not sure it is, Vonda said, but I'm warm. Rosalind wrote something in her notebook, came back out. She'd been doing this job for 11 years, and she'd seen a lot of improvised shelters. She said later that this was the first time she'd gone back to her office and looked up what thermal mass actually was. I want to get specific about the temperature numbers, because specificity matters here and vague claims don't serve anyone. The thermometer Vonda uses, the adhesive strip type, is accurate to within 2 or 3 degrees, which is imprecise but consistent. Consistent means you can track trends even if the absolute reading is slightly off. Her records, written in pencil on the back of a flattened cardboard box, show the following across the period from late November through mid-February. Overnight low outside ranged from 18 to 37 degrees Fahrenheit across that period. Not every night equally cold, there were warmer stretches. But the coldest nights, the sustained cold runs, those are the ones that test the system. On the 12 nights when the outside temperature was at or below 25 degrees, her interior low temperature recorded each morning when she woke was 62 degrees on 6 of those nights, 58 on 4, 54 on 1, the cloudy stretch, going on 8 days with no sun. 47 is cold for a bedroom. It's not comfortable. She wore every layer she had on that morning. But 47 is not 18. 47 is not a temperature that kills. The gap between 18 outside and 47 inside, 29 degrees of separation with no running fuel, no electricity, just bricks and accumulated heat. That gap is what Vonda built. And on the good nights, 62 degrees. That's warmer than a lot of apartments in cities where the radiator runs cold. Theo came back in January like she'd told him to. He came on a Tuesday evening, temperature outside at 22. He sat on the pallet floor with his back against the south wall and he stayed for about an hour. He was quiet for most of it. Vonda made coffee on a small propane camp stove she'd been given by another person at the lot, just used for cooking, no contribution to the overnight heat. They drank it and didn't talk much. When Theo left, he stood at the entry for a moment. I thought I understood brick, he said. You did understand it, you just understood it wrong. He laughed, which surprised her. Short laugh. More of a breath. Those buildings I was in, they were always getting cold, always had to keep moving to stay warm. Did anybody ever heat them before you got there? He thought about it. No. Then you were experiencing discharged bricks, she said. Cold bricks feel cold. Warm bricks feel warm. It's the same brick either way. He stood there a moment longer. You're going to be here all winter? Going to be here past winter, she said. He nodded, went back to his side of the fence. He started hauling bricks 3 days later. There's something in this that goes past the thermal mechanics, and I've been turning it over since I first visited the site. The bricks are free, not cheap. Free. They were sitting in a pile that nobody wanted, on land that nobody was using, demolition waste from structures that had already served their purpose and been pulled down. Nobody was going to stop Vonda from taking them. Nobody was going to charge her. Nobody was going to notice. The knowledge wasn't free in the same way. It came from 15 years of paid labor in a factory that no longer employs her. The ceramics plant closed in 2021. The knowledge she built there went with her when she lost her job, and then, eventually, her apartment. It's not uncommon for that to happen. People carry what they know. The industry that paid them for that knowledge closes or moves on, and the person still has the knowledge, but the application for it has vanished. Vonda found a new application. I'm not sure what to do with that morally. The knowledge is hers. The bricks are free. The result is real warmth and genuine cold. None of this required a building permit, an architect, a contractor, a bank loan, a security deposit, or a landlord. None of this can be taken from her for failure to pay, because there's no payment. The shelter doesn't require ongoing expenditure. It just requires understanding what the material can do and doing the work. That's a strange combination of freedom and precarity, and I don't think it resolves neatly into a lesson. What I keep coming back to is Theo's hand on the south wall. 6 in the evening, 31 degrees outside, the sun having gone down hours ago, and the brick, this old, free, discarded, cracked-around chimney brick from a factory nobody remembers, giving back what it took during the day, warm to the touch, still working. In late February, Vonda did something I didn't expect. She started building an addition, not a big one, a second small volume attached to the east side of the original structure, same double-wide, dry-stacked brick walls, same raised pallet floor but no sleeping area. What she was building, she explained when I asked, was a vestibule, an airlock. The idea came to her during a cold snap in mid-February. One of those 2-day stretches where the temperature didn't get above freezing even at midday. Every time she went in or out, she let a column of cold air into the interior. Each entrance cost her some fraction of what the bricks had stored. Small fractions, but they add up over a day. The vestibule solves this. You enter the vestibule, close the entry behind you. You're now in a small space, about 4 feet by 4 feet. That's warmer than outside but cooler than the main interior. You let your body adjust for 30 seconds. Then you enter the main shelter. The mass of the vestibule walls buffers the temperature transition. Cold air doesn't flood in because you're not opening a door from 18 degrees directly into 62. She built the vestibule walls in 3 days. It added maybe 60 bricks to her material count. She asked me, while she was working, whether I thought it would make a difference. I told her I thought it would. She said another brick. I think about 2 degrees, she said. Might be 3. Hard to know until I've been through a cold night with it. I asked her how she decided where her estimate came from. It's just logic, she said. Less cold gets in. Less cold means the bricks don't have to work as hard to compensate. Bricks work less. Interior stays higher. 2 or 3 degrees seems right. She was right. In the 2 weeks after the vestibule went up, her morning low temperature records averaged 59 degrees. Before the vestibule, during comparable outside temperatures, her average was 56. 3 degrees. Same as she'd said. There's a version of this story that ends with Vonda finding a permanent home, an apartment, a program, some institutional pathway off the lot and into a building with a real address. That version might still happen. Rosalind is working on it. The paperwork is in process for a housing voucher program, and Vonda has an appointment scheduled for the spring. I don't know how that will go. Housing systems are slow and opaque, and sometimes the appointment produces something, and sometimes it produces another appointment. What I do know is what Vonda has built while she waits. A shelter that keeps her at 60 degrees when it's 18 outside. That holds heat from yesterday's sun until tomorrow morning. That was built from free materials on land nobody was using, with knowledge that 15 years of industrial work put into her hands, using techniques that humans in cold climates have arrived at independently for thousands of years without needing to read about them anywhere. That's not inspirational. I'm not saying it should be this way. I'm not holding this up as a model anybody should aspire to. I'm saying the bricks do what they do. The physics is real. The warmth is real. On a night when it's 19 outside and Vonda wakes up at 4 in the morning to 62 degrees on that strip thermometer, inside walls built from material that was just sitting in a pile 3 months ago, the warmth is real. Theo has 12 courses of his own wall up now. He's going slowly. He's asking Vonda questions about the double Wythe gap, about which direction to orient his south wall, about how to pack mud into joints that won't hold. She answers every question. She told me near the end of February that she doesn't think of the bricks as shelter. They're a bank account, she said. You put heat in, the bricks hold it. You draw on it at night when you need it. The whole thing is just deposits and withdrawals. I thought about that for a while. It's not a bad way to think about thermal mass. It's a better analogy than the sponge one even, because a bank account doesn't squeeze out all at once. You draw on it in small amounts. The balance goes down slowly. The balance never hits zero before morning because the deposit from the day before was large enough. But here's where even that analogy breaks. A bank account requires money to open. You have to bring something to deposit before you can withdraw. Vonda brought what she had, what she knew, what 15 years of watching fired clay move through temperature cycles had put in her hands and in her understanding, without ever being labeled as survival knowledge, without anyone suggesting it would matter. One day outside the walls of a plant that no longer exists, the bricks were already there. The knowledge was already there. The warmth followed.